Greetings and salutations, delhs community. Welcome to a brand new edition of Holding Court here on the First State Hoops Report YouTube channel. I am, of course, your host, FSHR. There we go, founding editor Chris Stevens. And since we do have a long weekend ahead of us and we're officially past the halfway point of basketball season, figure it'd be cool to talk to you guys about what we've seen so far, what we can look forward to, and of course that long-awaited history lesson about the changes of high school sports here in Delaware regarding over the last 25 years and how it starts actually earlier than that. First, if you're not following us on all of our social media platforms, that info can be found in the description below, as well as our email address in case you have any thoughts, questions, comments, concerns, suggestions, and of course, nominees. We need nominees for First State Hoops Report Player of the Week for boys and girls. Remember, FSHR is one person, me. So I can't get to every game, obviously, and sometimes I may miss a box score here and there. And of course, it's never intentional. But any help I can get with that is greatly appreciated. So if y'all want to, nominate your friends, your classmates, your students, your sons, your daughters, cousins, nieces, nephews, we're open. FirstStateHoopsReport@gmail.com. But once again, it'll be in the description. That being said, without further ado, let's get to the first half of the boys season. Going pretty much as expected. I think what we were kind of forgetting about everyone else, everyone is good. There's about 10 or 12 teams that you could say have a realistic shot at a state championship, but there's only one state champion from last year, and of course that's Tower Hill. Got to see them overtake Caravel in the fourth quarter Thursday night, and that was more so about just the sheer will and determination of a team that gets overlooked, even though they won the state championship last year. Dean and Dylan Shepard are probably 1 and 1A as far as it goes right now in terms of the best boys basketball players. There are some other kids that you could throw out there, but when those two are working together, obviously they're twin brothers. They work together very well. They have them most of their lives, but putting them in a situation where you know that they have the experience, they have the skill, and they have the composure to come through, because the composure was big, because I got there late. I got to the Caravel Tower Hill game late because I went to my mother's retirement dinner, and I want to, congratulate my mom on 39 years of social service. She is now sitting at home relaxing, probably going to be watching this video. And that's where my work ethic comes from. People are like, how do you work so hard? You have a day job, you still go to First State Hoops Report and do all of that stuff. I don't know anything but hard work, because that's all my mother has ever shown me. So, you just things get passed down from generation to generation. The one thing that my family passed down to me was hard work. So everybody's like, how do you do it? It's in the blood. So that being said, got to see Tower this third quarter on, and Caravel looked pretty good, but you could sense the tide was turning because Tower Hill just does not give up. And once again, Dean and Dylan Shepard, they scored 20 of Tower Hill's last 22 points. When you have a tandem like that works as well as they do, and the team follows behind them, it's not like there's any dissension in the ranks, any foolishness. When those two decide to make a move, everybody follows behind them. They may not score, but the hustle picks up, the intensity on defense picks up, the rebounding picks up, the unselfishness picks up. That's why they're the defending state champs, and they will be until somebody beats them. But there's still a pretty good list of contenders that could take that title from them. Middletown and Seaford are probably 1 and 2 on that list. And then, of course, you still have Howard, Sally's, Appo, Caravel, Laurel, Sanford, Dover, Polytech. If you're looking for 2 sleepers, I offer 2 big ones: Wilmington Friends and Conrad. Friends, of course, they didn't play basketball until January 5th because, the bulk of their basketball team was on the football team. And, of course, the football team won the school's first state championship since 1984. So they were kind of busy, and they needed a little bit of a break. But now that they're starting to round into basketball shape, they're 5-0. And for Delaware, anyway, they have a huge starting lineup. There's Robert Tattersall, there's Ish Dobson, Hudson Sawakis. They're all 6'4", 6'5", and they're not like a slouchy, brooding, lumbering 6'4", 6'5" either. These guys can get up and down the floor. They can get above the rim at will. They've won one of their 5 games pretty doggone convincingly. Their first real test is Friday night. When Tower Hill visits Alapopas. That should be a fun one. Conrad, meanwhile, just defeated St. Elizabeth 59-52 on Saturday, excuse me. Junior guard Jalen Horsey dropped another 30-burger with 32 points. I had a chance to see him play down at the field house. We already had that discussion. And I came away impressed with just how he attacks whenever he gets the green light. I mean, he can shoot it. He has, moves. He has a bag that can get him to the bucket where he can draw the foul or make, easy shots in close. Very talented young man. And I feel like this is the year that Conrad finally gets over the hump in terms of making the state tournament, because there have been times when they've been like 11-9, 12-8, 13-7 last year, didn't get to make the tournament because of the points thing. But I feel like the points are going to add up for them this time around, because I don't know who else is in front of them as far as Diamond State goes. I mean, St. E was their biggest challenge, I feel like, and they came away with that with a win. They still have Archmere on the schedule later on in February. That one should be a fun one to watch. They're not a one-man team, of course. Besides Jalen Horsey, they have Kelsey Epps, the senior guard, Latrell Wright, who, of course, is the younger brother of Robert Wright III, and Stephon Ashley Wright, better known as Munchie, who are at Newman Goretti. But Latrell is pretty good, and in a point guard role for Conrad as well. That is going to be a team that, if they get a home game, I don't know if that is a win for any opponent coming in there, even if they come from, like, say, Flight A or the Henlopen South or the Henlopen North or even the Independent. That Conrad bunch gets really rowdy, and they haven't had a reason to get rowdy in the last couple of years, but give them a reason to get rowdy, and that team is going to be lifted up several levels above maybe what they're capable of. But, I mean, they're a good team, so don't give Conrad a home game in the first round of state tournament is all I'm saying to you. A lot of good tests to as far as speaking of tests, there are a few teams that can compete, but it's going to be hard for a few teams conference-wise, I'll say, to stay awake to get the most out of their schedule. Howard has Flight B, I won't say in a chokehold, because they still have to play AI, and AI is 7-2 right now. That's another sleeper people should really be paying attention to. But they got to stay sharp. They stay at Middletown, down at the Fieldhouse for Unlock the Light. They have a game. It's either at Penn or at Howard. I can't remember which. They do host Sally's the last Friday of the regular season at 4:45. So that is going to be the key for Howard, is can they stay awake, because Flight B is really just not what it used to be. And we'll have more on that in a second. Same probably applies for the Henlopen South, because Seaford and Laurel right now, the 1-2 right now. Indian River could present a challenge. Indian River is 7-3. Have a great scoring guard, senior guard Brandon Bradford. And if Indian River can get in the tournament, that's another team that you probably don't want to see in the first round. So everyone else, Flight A, we've already discussed Flight A. They right now, 7 of the 8 teams in Flight A are 500 or better. Newark isn't that far behind at 5-6. So you could have at least 5 Flight A teams in the state tournament. So they're just going to beat the out of each other, but they'll be well prepared for the state tournament. Big games on the boys' side this week. You've got Howard hosting Sanford on Tuesday. Apple is at Middletown. That probably will decide first place in Flight A. Seaford is at Laurel on Thursday. And, of course, we already mentioned Friends hosting Tower Hill on Friday. And Sally's is at Penn on Saturday, if everything works out with, the situation that happened at William Penn last week. If you haven't got your tickets for those games yet, you should do so right now, like as you're watching this video. Pull up Ticket Spicket or whatever, app that the schools are using to buy tickets. Make sure you get them, because they're going to go fast. Guaranteed. On the girls' side of things, it's more of the same. The top of the top is the top. Ursuline's 11-0 after a convincing win over Woodbridge on Saturday. Woodbridge is a really good team. We'll talk more about them in a second. Sanford is close behind. Tatnall and Delmarva Christian remain unbeaten. Caravelle is getting contributions from everybody to keep them afloat as defending state champs. The sleepers remain Archmere, AI DuPont, Cape and Lopin. Woodbridge has a chance to be very good down the stretch, too. I watched that game on YouTube yesterday. I wanted to go to that game, but I had an oil change that took a little longer than expected, so I missed out on any games yesterday. So looking forward to hitting back on the road and getting back to every available stop I can this particular week. But Woodbridge played really good in spots against Ursuline, but first quarter, they fell behind 16-4. Third quarter was the one that really did it for them with turnovers and missed shots. And you could say that a lot of that is correctable, but a lot of it at the same time is just that Ursuline, traditionally under John Noonan, plays defense. He coaches them so hard on that end of the floor. You figure he's going to end up being the sixth defender at some point when he's just, mimicking the movements with the feet and the arms and everything. But again, as I said last week, you can probably do what you want offensively on the John Noonan team, but defensively you have to show up. And that's one thing Ursuline has done in spades, and that's why they're 11-0. Girls games to watch this week. It's a lot to watch for this week. St. George's hosts Archmere on Tuesday. Then they travel to Appo, which will probably be the usual annual de facto Flight A championship game on Thursday. We'll be in the building for that one. Very much looking forward to that. St. Mark's has a couple big games this week. They host DMA on Tuesday. Then they visit Ursuline on Thursday. Archmere has St. E. It visits St. E on Friday, and Tatnall hosts Tower Hill. Tower Hill is 6-3. Let's not forget Tower Hill either. So plenty of good games to see. You should get me to a basketball game as soon as you can, because you're going to want to see these kids play before tournament time. There's a lot to like about high school basketball here in Delaware. I'm just going to keep banging that drum until people understand that the game is in a good place. It got to a good place because there had to be some eggs broken. As the old saying goes, you got to make an omelet, you got to break a few eggs. And we'll talk about that right now. I promised you guys a history lesson for the last, 2 or 3 weeks? So it's Martin Luther King weekend. And how that ties into high school basketball here in Delaware, it's important because there's just so much to unpack, and we'll unpack it now. I've stopped calling Dr. King's weekend a holiday because one of my favorite quotes of his is, anybody can be great because anybody can serve. So it's more of a day of service. So if you can volunteer or be of service to someone in your community on that particular day, that Monday, feel free to do so. We begin, of course, with the tragic events of April 4th, 1968. Dr. King is assassinated on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. That sets off a widespread bomb of civil unrest in the United States of America. There were riots in Detroit, Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Maryland, and, of course, little old Wilmington, Delaware. The riots spooked Mayor John Babiarz and Governor Charles Terry so bad that Terry called in the National Guard. And that started the longest occupation of American city by armed forces or military to date. The Guard stayed from April of 68 until January 21st, 1969, because Terry lost the election to the gubernatorial election to Russell Peterson, who, of course, the great wildlife refuge down on the riverfront is named after. And once Governor Peterson took office, he said, get them out. They got to go. So the Guard left in the middle of the night on January 21st, 1969. So the civil unrest that happened around the country and in Wilmington became known nationwide as white flight. That was because white people who were predominant, the majority population of quite a few cities, Wilmington included, all moved to the suburbs. Concurrent to that, there was a desegregation order that was slowly making its way through the Delaware courts. That didn't really take effect. It didn't become the gavel didn't bang until the spring of 77. So by the fall of 1978, busing would become the law of the land and has been ever since. The immediate impact on the schools was this. P.S. DuPont was a high school for a long time. That became a middle school, and the Brandywine School District sort of formed together, and the kids that would have went to P.S. started getting bused to Brandywine, Claymont, Concord, and Mount Pleasant. Delaware High School, which was on the outskirts of Wilmington in the Dunleavy section of Newcastle, closed entirely. It became a social service center. People, if you drive through Dunleavy and, make your way onto Route 9 eventually, you'll see that it's the Delaware's social service center, but it used to be Delaware High School over there. Howard was consolidated into the newly created Newcastle County Vocational Technical School District, which included Delcastle and Hodson. And Hodson was truly a VOTEC at that time because they didn't even have sports. They were a half-a-day program. Like, kids would go from different schools to in the first half of the day and then be bussed out to Hodson for the second half of their day for their vocation. And Hodson didn't become a full-day school and didn't start having sports until the second half of the 1980s. Most East Side, Southbridge, and West Side kids became part of the Christina School District, which, of course, was Christiana, Glasgow, Newark, yes. That meant a lot of talented athletes who were city kids ended up getting bussed out to different schools. And it didn't really matter that much for Brandywine or Red Clay because they were already solid athletically, but it was a windfall for Penn and Christina. That's when a lot of schools, Newark was already solid. Christiana had already won a state championship in football, made it to the state championship game for basketball. Glasgow had already won a Division II state football championship in the 70s, but it really became a windfall for those schools because they started getting more of the talented black kids from the city of Wilmington, which leads me to the summer of 1997. That was when it was announced that Wilmington High would close down, and the building that housed Wilmington High and Cab Calloway Performing Arts School would become the Charter School of Wilmington, which was sort of a novel thing at the time. Charter schools were just like this new idea in the late 90s. Then, of course, now they are one of the primary means of education nationwide, not just in Delaware. But it started the chain of events that's, led to the erosion of public education north of the C&D Canal. Wilmington has not had a traditional public high school since Wilmington High closed up in 1999. And I mean, I say this as a Howard alum. Like, back when my parents and my family members went to Howard, up until the end of the 70s, there wasn't an application process. If you were an East Side kid, like my family was, like we were firmly entrenched on the East Side for at least 50 years at that time. If you lived on the East Side, at that point, you went to Howard. But then, of course, once Howard got consolidated into Votech, that's when, application processes started. And Howard is in the city, but it's not a traditional public high school. So Mount Pleasant is close by. You can say the same for Brandywine and Concord, because they all have Wilmington addresses, but that's pretty much Brandywine 100. Mount Pleasant, of course, is, Penny Hill, Chalfont, and all of that. And there just hasn't been a traditional public high school in the city. And I don't know if there will be one at this point. But what does this have to do with basketball and high school, certain schools having better and sustained success in that sport? Without a great public education system, you're not going to have strong sports. And that's where all the privates and charters and the Votechs really started to make their move, especially in boys basketball. Girls basketball had already been kind of established as a private school, a faith-based school thing as far back as the late 70s, because Ursuline already won 2 state championships in the 70s. St. E won their first in 79. Padua won 2 in 80 and 81. Then St. Mark's ended up winning a few. Then Ursuline, of course, ran the table for the rest of the 80s and most of the 90s. So that had already been established, but the firm grip that it had already been entrenched with the erosion of public schools. As I mentioned before, the study of why it's important, the study of history and why it's important to us here at First State Hoops Report is because basketball didn't just start in this century. There were solid high school programs and public schools for years and years, and they just don't have it anymore because how things have gone in the 55 years since Dr. King's assassination. Is that by design? I'll let you be the judge. I won't say this isn't a knock on any private school or any charter school or any Votech program. I'm just giving you the facts so people can, at least understand why things are the way they are, because it's always been a question of, well, what happened to Newark? What happened to Glasgow? What happened to Howard? Well, not what happened to Howard. I mean, Howard has solid programs, but I mean, what happened to Dickinson or McCain or AI DuPont? Down a little further downstate, Seaford is experiencing a renaissance, but a lot of what happened with Seaford was the DuPont plant closing, because a lot of people had great jobs at that DuPont plant, and once it closed down, that's when Seaford sports and Seaford in general started to take a downturn. But it seems like it's on the upswing again, and and people, if you told me, because I went to high school, I grew up in Delaware where Middletown was the only high school. We have Middletown now, Appo, St. George's, which of course is now part of the Newcastle County Votech. There's MOT Charter. Odessa just opened up. There's going to be another high school opening on the other side of on the 896 side of Middletown in the next few years. If you told me that a one-stop town like Middletown would have 6 high schools by 2026, I would have said you were crazy. Man plans, God laughs. Or maybe it's vice versa. Who knows? But hopefully this can answer some of the questions about why high school sports are the way they are, especially basketball and football, and at least starts a discussion about why things are the way they are, and if so, what can be done to level the playing field, or in this case, the court. Those are the questions that I hope this little diatribe of mine have answered. And I want to thank y'all for watching this edition of Holding Court. Greatly appreciate y'all's time. Once again, all of our contact info, our social media channels will be down in the description below. You can find us on Instagram, on Facebook, on Twitter for the time being. And, any questions you have, just email us, FirstStateHoopsReport@gmail.com. Looking forward to seeing y'all. There's a lot of games this week and for the rest of the season. So much to discuss, so much to enjoy. Second half of the season. Oh yeah, before I leave, we are going to start doing 24 or more. If you've been following First State Hoops Report for a while, you know the 24 or more is our way of, handicapping the field. Who has the best chance to make the state tournament and where they might be slotted. Once again, it's not official. It's just, looking at the standings, looking at the point totals, and figuring out who has the best chance to make the tournament. So if you see your team on the bubble, don't get offended. If you see your team as being close to end, don't get your hopes up. Anything can change in these last 5.5 weeks of the season. But that pretty much covers it for this week's edition of Home Court. Greatly appreciate y'all's time as always. Look forward to seeing y'all in these gyms this week. Y'all be safe out there. Peace.